On the boats and on the trains. That's my Neil Diamond impression. That's as close as it gets. Good evening, Chag Sameach. Yeah, sure, it's a Chag already. I was told that I have to stay up here for the live stream, but it's a microphone that I don't have to hold because I'm Jewish and I have to speak with my hands. My name is David Komerofsky, and I am a progressive religious Zionist. And now I'm going to tell you what that means and why I think every Jew should be a progressive religious Zionist and why you don't even have to be Jewish to be a progressive religious Zionist. This session is titled A Mature Love, Progressive Religious Zionism. And it was born out of my experience in Hillel. It seems like it was 100 years ago, but when I was a much younger rabbi, this was 15 years ago, I was a Hillel director at the University of Texas at Austin, and I was on the board of the International Hillel Movement, and one of my responsibilities was to help come up with a global Hillel vision statement. And the Hillel vision statement that we came up with was that we envision a world in which every Jewish student makes an enduring commitment to Jewish life and learning. And my chiddush, or my addition to this was, and Israel. An enduring commitment to Jewish life, learning, and Israel. Because I believe that it is impossible at this time in history to live a fully meaningful Jewish existence without this enduring commitment to Jewish life, to the practice of Judaism, to ongoing Jewish learning, and to having a mature relationship with the state of Israel, a mature love. And what that mature love is simply neither teenage infatuation nor a broken marriage. The teenage infatuation of love with Israel, the immature love, is Israel can do no wrong. A teenager who is in love and just refuses to see the faults in the other person because you're in love. We have a number of rabbis in the room here. I'm sure when you are doing premarital care with couples, they're in love. They see the world through rose-colored glasses, and you're concerned if a couple is about to get married and they hate each other. So that's not supposed to come until the 75th anniversary. But an immature love is teenage infatuation, and an immature love is also the opposite extreme, which is we've been married for 75 years and we're tired of each other and we're waiting for the grandchildren to die of old age before we can finally get rid of each other. That kind of love is Israel can do no right. A mature love of Israel is neither of these two things. So what I want to share with you this evening is a vision that is based on something appropriate for Shavuot, and that is covenant. That the Jewish people has a covenant with God, a covenant with each other, and I believe a covenant with the land and the people of Israel. So I'm going to give you a few different examples of this, and I'm going to play a game with you where I'm going to give you I'll give you some introductions to these different themes, and then I'm going to give you some quotes, and we're going to see if we can guess who said them. You might not be able to guess because there's like 7 billion people alive today, and some of the people I'm going to be quoting are still alive, and some you may just not expect. But I'm not going to tell you who said the quote until after I give you the quote, because so often we make up our minds before we've heard what the person has to say. You see someone on TV and say, I so dislike that person, I am, no matter what, going to disagree with that person. Occasionally, people with whom you disagree might be right. That doesn't make them any less disagreeable, but it also doesn't make them wrong. So first, in my vision of this mature love for a progressive religious Zionism, it rejects immature attachments. So here I'm going to give you 3 quotes, one from a conservative rabbi, one from a reform rabbi, and one from a Reconstructionist rabbi. Not all of the progressive religious Zionist voices that I'm going to share with you are non-Orthodox, by the way. But here's one from a conservative rabbi in Los Angeles who says, Some American Jews still act like we are in a teenage relationship with Israel. Obsessed, emotional, sometimes jealous, quick to anger or to idolize. Others have walked away entirely like a bitter ex. Neither posture is sustainable for a lasting bond. Either to be obsessed or to be jealous, to be quick to anger or quick to idolize. That is from a rabbi, the founder of Ikar, take a guess. Yes, Sharon Brous. It is not Schulweis. No, it's Rabbi Sharon Brous. Here's from a Reform rabbi. A love that cannot be questioned cannot be real. A Judaism that cannot engage honestly with Israeli policy is not a mature Judaism. That is by a Reform rabbi in Baltimore named Rachel Shabbat Halachmi. Did she admit you to rabbinical school? Yeah. And then finally, a Reconstructionist rabbi. Zionism is not static. It must evolve with Jewish ethics, or it becomes an idol. And that is Rabbi David Teutsch, who's probably your teacher. So 3 Reform Conservative Orthodox who may not agree on everything, but are all Zionists. And so as Zionists, automatically, there's a segment of the population that is going to dismiss anything that they say. So a mature love for Israel recognizes that you are not going to make everybody happy because you love Israel. Now, what does that mean for a Reform, a Reconstructionist, or conservative rabbi in our context? You got to be careful where you walk. So often, I give thanks every day. You shouldn't listen to this, Rabbi Ross. I give thanks every day that I'm no longer a Hillel director. I don't know that I would be able to take it as a Hillel director at 53 like I did when I was 33. That the partnerships that I enjoy so much as a Reform rabbi, often we can't talk about Israel because Zionism is a 4-letter word. Covenant. Since this is Shavuot and the acceptance of the covenant and the acceptance of Torah again, a covenantal love is rooted in our identity and our endurance. Here is an Orthodox rabbi who, and you've probably heard of this rabbi. Since he's an Orthodox rabbi, I can give away it to him, who's no longer living, who said, I love Israel as I love my children, not because they are perfect, but because they are mine, and because I believe in who they can become. That was Rabbi David Hartman, the founder of the Shalom Hartman Institute. And then Rabbi David Ellenson, of blessed memory, who was a number of our teachers, said that to be a part of the Jewish people today means to be engaged in an honest and complex relationship with the state of Israel. And that relationship must be nourished by both pride and moral concern. Now, there are some who would say that every one of those quotes from 2 Reform rabbis, 1 conservative rabbi, and 1 Reconstructionist rabbi is heresy, because we are daring to air public laundry about our concerns with Israel. Not with Israel's right to exist, but with Israel at all, and for some, that is the 3rd rail. To talk about it and to dare question is latet pitchon pe lagoyim, to give everybody else the excuse to hate Israel. If you walk away with nothing else this evening, I hope it is with some confidence that you can be a religious progressive Zionist, and I want to define for you, at least in my mind, what that means. Unless somebody says, well, no, that's just crazy left-wing, wacko, non-Orthodox rabbis. Here's a quote from someone who's no longer living and unfortunately has no heirs, who said, Zionism is a return to Judaism, even before it is a return to the land of the Jews. That was said by a secular Jew named Theodor Herzl. That Zionism is a return to Judaism. We didn't just pick this place at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea because the hummus is so good. That there is a covenantal relationship between the Jewish people and its land. And Zionism is about deeply rooted connection to Judaism and this land, Dafka, because we are Jews. And now here's another radical idea. We must preserve Israel not only as a country, but as a cause. That was Shimon Peres, the only person ever to be prime minister of Israel and president of Israel. And then one last quote about this covenant, which I love. This is by Rabbi Nama Kelman, a Reform rabbi, who comes from conservative Jewish royalty. She said, "We are not tourists in Jewish history. We are citizens of Jewish history. Zionism was never about escaping responsibility, but about embracing responsibility." So this mature love of which I speak is like, what happens when the dog catches the car. That for thousands of years, our people lived in exile, built rabbinic Judaism with a series of ideals and ideas and principles for self-governance without it being real. And it took until 1948 for Jews to be responsible not only for ourselves, but for other people. And this clash between Jewish ideals and reality creates the present conflict. As Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, a conservative rabbi of the 20th century, said, "I don't believe that Jews are better than everybody else, but I think we should try to be." And I think that Hertzberg's summary adequately represents part of the Jewish angst about what do we do when Jews are in control of things? And if you grew up as I did, where you learned to shudder when something bad happened and a Jew was responsible for it. I'm not old enough to remember when Berkowitz was caught as the son of Sam Killer, but I can imagine all these Jews schreien Gewalt. It has to be a Berkowitz. In Cleveland, of course, you say, "Oh, not those Berkowitzes." But when we see names like Epstein or Weinstein, you go, "Oh, why couldn't they have changed their names?" That we feel pain when Jews do bad things. Fear that somebody's going to blame us for everything. Yeah, it's a good point.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah, one Jew does something bad, every Jew is to blame. Yes. Here's some arguments for religious Zionism as a moral imperative, but progressive religious Zionism. And I'm going to get to why the progressive part. This is a living modern Orthodox rabbi. Love of Israel that does not take seriously the moral claims of others, especially the Palestinians, betrays Judaism itself. This is Rabbi Irving Greenberg, Yitz Greenberg. And now here's a radical lefty. We do not want to create a political Levantine state, but a spiritual center for the Jewish people, a just society, a model society, which will justify the return of the Jews to the land of Israel. That was David Ben-Gurion. And now somebody farther to the left than Ben-Gurion, and now I'm being facetious. The greatness of the Jewish people is not in its power, but in its conscience. That was the first Likud prime minister of the state of Israel. Anybody remember who that was? Menachem Begin. It is always the far right, or what seems like the far right at the time, that makes progress towards peace. I think it's Menachem Begin, Ariel Sharon, and Yitzhak Rabin, none of whom was a tremendous lefty. Rabin moved left towards the end of his life and paid for it with his life. But it is not the peaceniks who make the peace. It is the people on the far right. So in order for progressive religious Zionists to take ourselves seriously and be taken seriously by others, we have to stand for something. And that stand for something means standing for Judaism, standing for Israel as a Jewish state, that lives up to Jewish ideals. Our relationship with Israel has often been emotionally reactive, either defensive idealization or total withdrawal. And neither mode, all in or all out, reflects the values of covenant. It reflects the values of a prophetic accountability or a moral responsibility that I think should define progressive religious Zionism. Too many Jews are walking away from the state of Israel, walking away from Zionism, because they feel like they can't ask questions. And it's not just among the young. It's people of all ages. Progressive religious Zionism differs from ultra-Orthodox religious Zionism, or Haredi Zionism. Haredim, we think of sometimes as not being Zionists, but there are they're called Haredi Leumi, the ultra-right nationalist Zionist Jews. Haredim, the black hats, comes from Isaiah, I think Isaiah 66, about people trembling before God. You can think of them as the Quakers and the Shakers. Like in Christianity, the Quakers and Shakers are people who feared and tremble before God, and the Haredim, that's where it comes from. Haredi Zionism often withholds religious legitimacy from the state. And Haredi Zionism sees the state as inherently sacred and therefore above critique. But progressive religious Zionism sees the state of Israel as a sacred opportunity, not as a finished product. That it is not enough just to have the country. It is not enough just to have the land, but it is to govern it according to Jewish principles. Religious Zionism is a moral imperative about human dignity and about justice. Ultra-Orthodox and Haredi Zionist voices often center on things like land and power and a messianic destiny. Progressive religious Zionism, by contrast, centers the image of God in every person, Jewish and non-Jewish, and insists that Jewish sovereignty be measured not only in military strength, but in moral strength. That's why Irving Greenberg writes that love of Israel does not take seriously Israel's responsibility as a Jewish state to care for its non-Jewish people under its control, betrays Judaism. And this becomes complex when we're never thanked for it, when it's never enough, when we fail what Natan Sharansky called the 3D test of anti-Semitism, that critiquing Israel is legitimate unless it crosses one of three lines. Sharansky says that delegitimizing the state of Israel, saying that it doesn't have the right to exist. Like, if you think that Pakistan has a right to exist, but Israel doesn't, that's not legitimate, because Pakistan was artificially carved out of the British Empire in 1947. And the state of Israel was carved out of the British Empire in 1948. So unless you have a problem with Pakistan, you know, if you, or I put it more crassly, and India, yeah. The British Empire screwed up a lot of stuff. I mean, gave us great tea in the afternoon, but otherwise, a lot of problems. I put it more crassly. If you live near a river whose name you can't pronounce, like Tuscarawas or Cuyahoga or whatever, chances are we live on land that was stolen from somebody else. I have a deed to real estate in Canton, Ohio, but it doesn't go back further than when the house was built, which was, I think, 1980. To whom do I owe reparations for that land? Do I have to find Iroquois or other native populations? Unless you are willing to give up your property in Boston, Massachusetts, to the Native Americans who your ancestors or somebody else's ancestors kicked off that land, how dare you delegitimize the state of Israel, which is the second D, double standard. Holding Israel to a standard to which we do not hold other countries, including our own, is not legitimate criticism of Israel. And the third D is demonization, that, you know, false claims of Israel committing genocide. If Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians, Israel is failing miserably, because there are more Palestinians today than there were in 1948. Are there more Jews today than there were in 1948? No. There are two populations globally that I know of that entered the 21st century in fewer numbers than we entered the 20th century, meaning there were more Jews and more Native Americans in 1900 than there were in 2000. So if there's a genocide being committed against anybody, it's not against the Palestinians. Does that mean that Israel is beyond reproach? Absolutely not. And being able to hold those two truths at the same time is the progressive religious Zionism. So what's religious about this? And what's progressive about it? Progressive about it is about seeing people created in the image of God and not demonizing Palestinians because their government is corrupt. This is, I think, the saddest reality of what in Israel is called the matzav, or the situation. Nobody wants the Palestinians. The Palestinians are, in my mind, the Jews of the Arab world. Nobody wants them. So which allows for ridiculous schemes like Trump-a-Lago and Gaza-Lago, whatever they're going to call it, where people will start to take it seriously because they're so tired of the status quo of saying nobody wants these people. You know who killed? You know who? If anybody's killed Palestinians and trying to make a genocide, it was King Hussein. Killed 100,000 Palestinians in Black September in 1970. Yeah. Where's the outrage? Is Jordan illegitimate? Jordan was stolen from the British Empire and tricked in the same way that the British and the British government promised the same land to multiple peoples. But being Jewish means, and being a progressive religious Zionist says, the Jewish claim to the land of Israel is not just because we're there and because we bought the land and fought for the land and won the land and earned the land in the same way that every other country does, but because it is the historic home of the Jewish people. And this covenantal connection that we have with our history demands a mature relationship with it. In the words of David Hartman, loving Israel like we love our children because it is ours and because we believe in what it can become. Progressive religious Zionists insist that democracy, pluralism, and equality are not just secular add-ons, that they're not 20 or 21st century innovations that don't belong in the Middle East. That the great monotheistic ideas of Judaism, ethical monotheism, this combining of an idea that there's one God and that God demands that we behave in a certain way, that's Judaism's innovation, that comes out of the Middle East. So it is indigenous, just like we are, and every human being created in the image of God deserves respect and dignity, and a Jewish state that does not reflect that truth cannot fulfill its mission. Now, things are more complicated when we consider that we don't live there. Anybody in here an Israeli citizen? Anybody here own real estate in Israel? Anybody pay taxes in Israel? Anybody served in the IDF? No. What right do we have to tell the state of Israel to do anything? I don't know if you follow too much news. I try not to, beyond what my blood pressure can take. But, I said, there was somebody with whom I don't agree politically who on most things, who said, in response to France saying that Israel has to make certain concessions in order for to create a Palestinian state. And his response was, if France wants a Palestinian state, they can carve it out of the French Riviera. Another ridiculous idea, but this crazy person has a point. How can you sit in a salon in Paris where you are not under constant threat, and when you are under threat, you go crazy, like we do in this country? When's the last time you were able to go to the airport and not have to get strip searched because of what happened in 2001? We overreact. Israel underreacts. And when Israel appropriately reacts, it gets vilified for it. But we don't live there. So what right, and this part is not rhetorical, what right as American Jews do we have to have an opinion about what happens in Israel? Yeah.
So first of all, everyone has a right to an opinion. I think what you're really saying Israel, what does God require of you? Or what does human standard of conduct require of you? It's not that we are telling, we're asking, is this what your founding fathers wanted? Is this what your parents wanted for Israel now? You know, that it's really asking them.
Very good. That's very prophetic.
Reminding them.
Yeah, you sound like the prophet Micah. What does God demand of you? Yeah, good. Very good.
Are we doing questions?
We're going to come to that now. I'm going to wrap up in just a moment, and then we'll come to questions. You're right. Every Jew is entitled to at least 3 opinions about every subject. The old narrative, and this is where I think there has been a generational shift, the old relationship used to be transactional. Remember the Karen Ami boxes in religious school, if you're of a certain age, that you have to help your poor brothers and sisters in Israel. And that narrative shifted once people started visiting Israel and seeing that the quality of life in many ways is much better than here. I don't feel the need to cover myself in sanitizer when I get on a light rail in Jerusalem like I do on the New York subway system. The first time that I went to, I flew to and from Israel in the same month. This is about 20-some years ago, and it happened to be the month I wasn't paying any attention. It happened to be the month when the airport changed. So I flew the first time and landed at Ben Gurion, like a refugee, where you saw, the Pope would get off the plane and kiss the ground. You'd come down the air steps and you'd have to fight with each other. I'm like, I just got off the plane with these people and now I got to fight with them to get onto a little trolley to get to the airport. And the next time I flew, the following month, it was like being in Saudi Arabia. Not that I've been there, but it looked like the airport looked like a beautiful shopping mall. It's clean, and said, it's not a third world country. So the narrative about our poor brothers and sisters, when people started reading the book of the Startup Nation about 20 years ago or so, about Israel's economic miracle, realized it's a covenantal relationship. It's not, these are our poor brothers and sisters. These are our siblings. It's our family. And it is our homeland as well. And we lived for a while with the mythology that anti-Semitism was over, that we had moved into the next phase of history. Anti-Semitism was never over, and it was never gone. It was dormant, like those flowers that, for some reason, the people from whom we stole our property, bought our property, planted annuals. I don't do anything with the garden, but every year, Mary Alice Fesco's flowers bloom in our backyard. They perennials. They come back every year, these perennials. And our relationship with the state of Israel just has blossomed in part in response to October 7th because we've recognized that the weed of anti-Semitism just popped back up again and was given license in ways that we could not have imagined. And it started even earlier with remember Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm such a romantic. That's where Ronit and I are going for our anniversary next week. So we're going to Charlottesville. I'm thinking about getting a tiki torch. But we really are going to Charlottesville. But when they said Jews will not replace us, there's anti-Semitism has always been there. It was not polite to give voice to it. It's still there. And now we see that the state of Israel as a safe place for Jews. I think that what it is at the heart of progressive Jewish anxiety around what is happening with an existential threat to the state of Israel is, aside from all of the other chaos happening in the Middle East, is we've lived with this mythology that Judaism, that it's safe to be Jewish anywhere. And so maybe for the Jews of France, the Jews of Germany, the Jews of Austria, the Jews of South Africa, maybe they need to go to Israel in order to be safe, but we're safe. Just by show of hands, anybody have friends who've recently gotten European Union citizenship? How ironic is that? That Jews in the United States whose ancestors fled Europe are looking for citizenship in Europe. So I think that part of the progressive religious anxiety is that the same extremism that has taken root here is taking root in Israel as well. And we feel like orphans for our progressivism, for our Zionism, and for our religious Zionism, because we are somewhere in the middle, and that's a lonely place to be. But I think being a centrist has opportunities that go along with it, because you never have to move too far to get to speak to somebody else. As Rabbi Cohen pointed out in his beautiful session on Musar earlier, that if you're doing something not just for yourself, if you're neither a doormat nor totally self-obsessed, that you're in the middle, you're doing so, you are closer to being able to be in covenant with other people. So progressive religious Zionism affirms that we are in covenant, not just with the land, but with our people, with Torah and with God. And that covenant calls us to love fiercely, to critique bravely, and to act justly. It is neither messianic nationalism nor political abandonment. It is a love that stays, that struggles, and that builds. It is a love that is mature and recognizes that Israel can do right and Israel can do wrong. It is not Israel love it or leave it. It is Israel love it, because we cannot afford to leave it. I think that a progressive religious Zionism is a mature form of patriotism. In our congregation in Canton, after October 7th, we put the flags back up. The flags, I've only been there 5 years, so I don't know when the flags came down, but the Israeli and American flags are now on the bima. And during the Mariv service here, Rabbi Hal Luria mentioned that since October 7th, they end every service with Hatikvah, and we do as well. We don't end the service, but we do the prayer for the state of Israel and Hatikvah. And I get criticism for it, but I'm willing to endure that criticism because it's not jingoism. It is not my country, love it or leave it. It is my country, I love it because I cannot afford to leave it.
What does the criticism say?
That it's Jewish nationalism in a sacred space. I cannot separate my Judaism from my Zionism. And that is not because I believe in a messianism. I cannot separate my Judaism from my Zionism because I was fortunate enough to be born at a time where Zionism is more than an idea, it is a reality. And I think we have taken for granted, too many of us have taken for granted, that the state of Israel exists. And I think that a mature religious Zionism, progressive religious Zionism, recognizes that it is not permanent unless we make it permanent. That if we believe that God gave us the land and nobody else can take it from us, well, we were in big trouble for 2,000 years because other people had it. And if this is divine intervention, well, God intervenes in lots of other places as well. You know, you have to act for what you believe in, and I think that the state of Israel is worthy of our progressive religious Zionism. Yes, Michelle.
So I think what's kind of interesting is that if you go to different parts of the United States, right, like if you're in a city, in New York, in DC, in Boston, Chicago, whatever, you're in like more progressive parts of the United States, you don't see people with American flags outside their houses. Everybody has American flags outside their houses.
Outside their what?
Their home. They don't. They just don't. And it doesn't mean that they're not patriotic. It doesn't mean that they're, you know, I don't think it's just kind of it's not a prominent thing. And then when you go to Ohio, small town Ohio, and I have a friend of mine who I was living in Philly. My friend is Italian from Italy. And I took her back to Ohio so that she could see small town America because she had not been outside of Philly, right? And we both were driving through a town. We were driving. And we had this moment where we were driving through this town and we were both like, you know,
Lots of flags.
like just nonstop flags everywhere. And she was like, this is so weird. This is just weird, you know? And then we would drive through another town and you know, most of the towns that were sort of rural or small town America were like that. And then you get back to Philly and no, you're not seeing American flags everywhere, right? Or you go to Cleveland and you're not seeing American flags everywhere. So I think that part of what you're saying is like, it's resonating in some ways, and I hear it, but I wonder how much of it is influenced by where you are living in the country. Because if DC or New York or Boston, it might be just a different take on like what is this need to be so nationalistic, patriotic, like what does it mean to be a patriot? And like I said, in DC, you don't even see this stuff, and almost every single person in that city is serving in some way. Or
Well, so I think in that case, I think those symbols sometimes become idols, and an idol is in place of what you're supposed to be worshiping, which is the idea. So faith is not worshiping an idol. Most of the Torah is commanding us not to be idolaters, because we're surrounded by idolaters in Egypt, on where we were, and in Canaan, where we're going. And in order to avoid that, we don't worship a symbol, which is, I think, also where the criticism of the flags comes in, but it's patriotism about an idea that you cannot see, but you have to live. Yeah. But no, I agree. And you see red state, blue state, and rural, suburb. All of it is used, and Zionism is also, it's used as a way to divide. That either you're with us or against us. I think that it is quite possible to be patriotic and have a flag, and it's quite possible to hate America and still put up a flag.
But it's not about hating America. It's about why do you, if everybody on my street is displaying their flag and I suddenly feel like I need to have a flag, to me that's fascism.
Yeah, well, it's a
Right?
it's a group thing.
I
Yeah.
do not want to be, the whole point of the United States is that I should choose whether or not I want to put up the
Yeah,
flag.
of course.
It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not 10 of my neighbors have it up. And if they start ostracizing me for not having a flag, that's fascism.
Yeah, I agree. It's your choice. You can say it's my land. I can do with it as I wish, and come onto my property. Otherwise, I'll shoot you. That's very American.
So I want to take your adjectives seriously. I want to take the adjective religious and the adjective progressive. And post-October 7th, what I've been doing a lot is trying to figure out Israeli and Palestinian voices that would speak to those adjectives. So I'm wondering how you connect the dots to a group like Small MME, who use the specific language of religious and progressive, and does that resonate as a fair correlation?
I don't know. I'd not considered that before. We say some more about what small enemies.
There's a very small group of Israelis who are, I want to say, use the language of modern Orthodox or Dati, but they're not ultra-Orthodox. They're willing to criticize the state, but they also want to be deep in their Zionism, and they're also very liberal in their political stances in everyday life. So they're having this interesting conundrum of being very religious and being very liberal and trying to make sense of their Zionism in light of that, and trying to have a mature criticism of the state of Israel. They recently had a conference in New York City a month or so ago. 500 or 600 people showed up in New York City. An equal number had met in Tel Aviv about a month before that. And I think it's a new conversation of folks in Israel who are trying to come up with a voice that is different than a party line, either on the extreme left or on the extreme right. But to engage in the conversation, I like the language of this mature Judaism, that the maturity to them says that they want to be observant, but they also want to have an ethical and moral standard that permits them to criticize when they need to, which is just fascinating.
Yeah, I would consider that part of this tent. That's why, and I'm happy to, I brought copies of these quotes and more for those who would like to take them with you to be able to study them, and to look for inspiration, since it's the holiday of receiving Torah. This is part of ongoing revelation, is that people who are still alive and people who've just died within the last century also transmit Torah. That Israel is a living organism that changes, and the reality in which we live today is we can't afford to close our eyes to what's happening anywhere in the world, because it's a global society and it impacts everything. It's part of an economic crash in one place around the world, especially in this country, impacts the rest of the world as well. Because of social media, because of technology, we are able to have relationships. And because of technology, we're able to go to Israel. For how many hundreds of years did we say next year in Jerusalem and we didn't mean it? But now you can get on a plane and go to Tel Aviv, and then in 20 minutes and 12 shekels, you're on a train and you're in Israel, or you're in Jerusalem. But we know what's happening, and so part of this covenant we have is with real live Israelis, with real live Palestinians, with people who live this reality every day, and to embrace the nuance, that maturity is about nuance. And I'll give you one last quote. This is from Chaim Weizmann, the first president of the State of Israel, who came from behind what would become the Iron Curtain. He wrote, "Zionism is not a refuge movement, but a movement of regeneration." That the next chapter of Jewish history and the Jewish present is being written not here, but there. And we are fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective, to be living at a pivotal time in Jewish history. Sometime in the next decade, if it hasn't already happened, there will be, for the first time in 2,000 years, more Jews living in the land of Israel than outside of the land of Israel. Most of our history as rabbinic Jews has been in diaspora. And our present crisis is our dream coming true. That we are no longer a wandering people. We are a people with a home. And in order for this to be more than a refuge, but to be a regeneration, we have to embrace this mature love that allows both for Israel's imperfection and its possibility of becoming more perfect than it has been. And that is why I think we're entitled to our opinions, because it's ours as well. And when the Messiah comes, from what I read in some newspapers, we're all going to be resurrected and walk there anyhow. So don't waste your money on the ticket. Apparently, you're going to get there for free by rolling under the earth. Thank you, and Chag Sameach.